Welcome, dear friends, to a quiet corner of the forest where mice, hedgehogs, and squirrels share gentle days and little adventures. Pour yourself a warm cup of tea, settle in, and let's wander together into the cozy world of woodland tales. Whiskers in the workshop. Down in a hollow between mossy oaks, there stood a small round workshop made from an old tree trunk, its windows glowing with amber light. Inside lived Tobias the hare, a thoughtful fellow with large ears, spectacles that always slipped down his nose, and an endless habit of tinkering. He wasn't an inventor of great machines. No, Tobias's joys were small, mending teapots, tightening handles, and sanding smooth the splinters from old stools. One windy morning, as leaves rustled outside, Tobias heard a knock. It was Mina the dormouse, clutching a chair almost half her size. "Oh, Tobias," she squeaked. "It wobbles dreadfully. Every time I sit, it tips, and I nearly spill my tea." Tobias smiled, dusting with shavings from his apron. "Bring it in, Mina. Let's have a look." The chair was indeed precarious, its legs uneven as if they'd been chewed by a squirrel in a hurry. Tobias fetched his measuring stick and tapped thoughtfully at the joints. Loose dowels." Mina perched nervously on a stool while Tobias worked. He sanded the legs, glued the pegs, and hummed a soft tune. Just as he finished, Grady the squirrel bounded in, carrying a basket of nuts. "What are you fixing now?" he chattered. "A chair," Tobias said calmly. Grady flopped onto it before the glue had dried. The chair wobbled once and collapsed spectacularly. Mina squealed, Tobias groaned, and Grady lay in a pile of sticks and glue, laughing until tears rolled down his whiskers. "Patience, Grady," Tobias said, though even he couldn't help chuckling. The three of them gathered the pieces, and Tobias began again, this time with Grady banished to the corner. Mina brewed tea on the little iron stove while Tobias worked with quiet care. At last the chair stood solid and straight. Mina tested it carefully, rocking side to side. Not a creak, not a wobble. "Perfect," she sighed, clapping her paws. Grady insisted on trying again, but this time the chair held firm beneath his antics. Tobias leaned back, proud. All it needed, he said, was patience and steady hands. Mina carried the chair home, smiling all the way. Tobias swept his floor, humming as wood shavings curled his feet, while Grady teased, "Next time you build me something unbreakable." But Tobias only smiled, thinking that in his little workshop, even the simplest repairs carried stories worth telling. It was raining steadily when Hazel the hedgehog appeared at Tobias's workshop door, clutching a teapot to her chest. Her prickles were damp, her apron spotted with raindrops. "Oh, Tobias," she said, "it's the lid. It keeps slipping right off whenever I pour. Yesterday, I nearly scalded my paw." Tobias welcomed her in, shaking rain from his ears. He examined the teapot carefully, squinting through his spectacles. The lid rattled loose, sliding side to side. "A poor fit indeed," he said, "but we'll soon see it right." He fetched his calipers, measuring the rim, muttering numbers under his breath. Hazel perched nervously on a stool, watching. Just then, Grady the squirrel bounded in again, dripping wet. "What's being fixed today?" he cried, peering eagerly at the teapot. "A lid," Tobias said firmly, nudging Grady back before he tipped something over. Grady wasn't to be deterred. "What if you made a new lid shaped like an acorn? Or a nut? Or, better yet, a lid that whistles when it's ready for tea?" Tobias raised an eyebrow. "We are not building whistles. We are making the lid fit." While Hazel giggled behind her paws, Tobias set to work. He sanded the rim carefully, smoothing the uneven edges. Then, from a scrap of oak, he carved a thin ring to line the lid. He glued it in place, clamped it, and polished the whole piece until it gleamed. At last he pressed the lid back on. It sat snugly, no wobble, no rattle. Tobias poured water from the kettle into the pot and tipped it. The lid stayed perfectly in place. Hazel clapped her paws, delighted. Oh, Tobias, it's wonderful. No more accidents. Grady sniffed. It would still be better if it whistled. Hazel ignored him and tucked the teapot safely in her basket. She promised Tobias a loaf of her blackberry bread in thanks, and off she went into the rain, humming happily. Later, as Tobias swept his floor and tidied his tools, he smiled. The little workshop felt warmer than ever, filled with the scent of polished wood and the memory of Hazel's relieved smile. And though Grady continued to grumble about whistles, Tobias knew that sometimes the simplest fix was the best. The next visitor came on a windy morning. Bramble the badger lumbered in, shaking leaves from his coat. His deep voice rumbled as he said, "Tobias, my staircase is betraying me." "Betraying you?" Tobias asked. "Squeaks," Bramble explained. "Every time I climb, it squeals like a family of field mice. I can't sneak for biscuits in the night without the whole house knowing." Grady, already lounging by the stove with a pawful of nuts, burst into laughter. "A badger trying to sneak? Oh, this I must see." Bramble scowled, but Tobias only nodded thoughtfully. "Squeaks, eh? That calls for wax and wedges. Lead the way." So off they went, Tobias with his toolkit slung over his shoulder. Bramble's burrow was cozy but dark, lined with shelves of books and jars of preserves. The staircase was sturdy, but when Bramble demonstrated, each step gave a sharp, protesting squeak. Tobias crouched, prodding the boards with a practiced paw. Loose joints, nothing dreadful. He worked carefully, tapping thin wedges between the boards, brushing melted beeswax along the cracks. The scent of honey filled the air. Bramble watched, arms folded, while Grady darted up and down the stairs, delighting in making them squeak louder before Tobias fixed them. Finally, Tobias straightened, dusting his paws. "Try now." Bramble climbed the steps. Silence. Not a groan, not a squeak. He came down again, grinning. "Marvelous. My midnight biscuits will be safe once more." Grady whispered loudly, "We'll still hear you chewing." But Bramble only chuckled, clapped Tobias on the back, and insisted he stay for tea. Over steaming mugs, they shared thick slices of honey cake, the room cozy despite the wind outside. When Tobias finally returned to his workshop that evening, lantern in paw, he felt tired but content. Helping his friends always filled the day with purpose, and left his heart just as warm as the fire in his stove. One golden afternoon, Mina the dormouse returned, this time dragging a shelf behind her. Or rather, half a shelf. The other half was tied awkwardly to her tail with string. "Tobias," she puffed, "it drooped right off the wall. My pots rolled everywhere." Tobias gently untangled the string and examined the battered shelf. The brackets were bent, the wood warped. "You've been putting too much on it," he said kindly. "Shelves have limits." Mina's whiskers twitched. "But where else am I to put my jars of gooseberry jam and my candied chestnuts and my spare lanterns?" Grady, nibbling a nut in the corner, suggested, "On the floor." "Mina gariet." Tobias fetched new bracket from his drawer, sturdy iron ones he'd been saving. He planed the warped wood smooth, humming as curls of shavings scattered. Mina sat cross-legged, counting the jars she would put back once it was repaired, while Grady made tallies of how many jars of jam he might sneak when she wasn't looking. At last the shelf was whole again, polished and solid. Tobias carried it back to Mina's cottage, where he fixed it firmly to the wall, testing it with a firm shake. It did not budge. Mina clapped her paws with delight and immediately began arranging jars in precise rows. Grady sidled up to a jar of jam. Tobias cleared his throat sharply. Grady sighed and backed away. By the time Tobias returned home, twilight had fallen. His workshop smelled faintly of pine from the new brackets, and his lantern glowed warmly. Another day, another mended thing, another friend a little happier than before. And for Tobias, that was enough. It was early spring when Tobias decided to fetch timber from the grove beyond the river. He carried his walking stick, humming as he went, spectacles slipping down his nose as usual. The air was fresh with damp moss, and primroses dotted the banks like drops of butter. The journey should have been simple, but halfway across the meadow, Tobias encountered a most unexpected sight: a line of geese marching in solemn single file. At the front was their leader, an especially tall goose with feathers ruffled against the breeze. She flapped her wings and honked orders as the others waddled along. Behind them trailed Grady the squirrel, trying in vain to direct traffic. "They won't listen," Grady squeaked when he saw Tobias. "I tried leading them to the pond, but they keep following me instead." Sure enough, every time Grady darted left, the geese turned left. When he darted right, they followed. The squirrel looked utterly harassed. Tobias chuckled, leaning on his stick. "It seems you've been promoted to Goose Marshal." "Marshal? Prisoner, more like." Grady squeaked as the tall goose nipped at his tail for dawdling. With some effort, Tobias stepped in. He clapped his paws smartly, then pointed toward the pond. The geese blinked, shuffled, and after a bit of muttering among themselves, turned in the right direction. Grady collapsed in the grass, exhausted. By the time the gaggle reached the water, Tobias was chuckling heartily. The geese slid in with triumphant splashes, honking merrily. Grady shook himself and declared, "I am never working with poultry again." Tobias gathered his timber at last, ears twitching with amusement. It had been an unexpected parade, but he suspected the tale would be told for weeks over tea. On another day, Hazel the hedgehog appeared with a rolled-up paper. "It's a map," she announced, bursting into Tobias's workshop. "I found it tucked in an old book of gardening notes." Grady immediately leapt onto the bench, eyes shining. "Treasure." Hazel frowned. "It might simply be where my great-aunt planted carrots." Still, the trio gathered round. The map was indeed scrawled with winding lines and peculiar symbols. An acorn here, a teacup there, and a big star near the edge. Excitement grew. They decided to follow it. Tobias, ever cautious, tucked the map under his vest, and off they went. The trail led through brambles, over roots, and across the little stream, until they reached the marked star. And there they found a mound of stones. Hazel's whiskers drooped. Grady pawed eagerly at the rocks. Beneath them lay a rusty tin, its lid sealed tight. Hearts beat faster. Tobias pried it open carefully. Inside were seeds, neatly wrapped, carefully labeled. Radishes, carrots, and turnips, Tobias read aloud. Grady groaned. "Vegetables? That's not treasure." Hazel, however, clapped her paws with delight. "It is treasure. Great-aunt must have hidden them for spring planting." The seeds were divided among them, and later that week, Hazel's garden beds were richer than ever. Grady sulked only until Hazel promised him first pick of the radishes. Tobias smiled to himself, knowing that sometimes the simplest finds are the richest of all. Clover the dormouse was determined to have a proper wash day. She strung her line across the orchard, pinned her sheets, and stood back proudly as they billowed in the breeze. But the breeze grew stronger. By the time Tobias came strolling down the path, Clover was leaping after runaway pillowcases. A sheet snapped loose and sailed like a ghost into the air. Clover squeaked, dashing in circles. "Help!" she cried, pointing at the airborne laundry. Tobias set down his basket and gave chase. He leapt, ears flapping, but the sheet danced just out of reach. Grady arrived, as he always did at the worst moment, and promptly tangled himself in another sheet, toppling head over paws. The three of them became a muddle of cloth, paws, and laughter. At last, Tobias managed to pin down the flying sheet beneath his walking stick. Clover scrambled over and secured it with twice as many pegs as before. When all was calm, they sat beneath the orchard tree, sheets fluttering gently overhead. Clover brought out a plate of honey biscuits in thanks, though Grady emerged from his tangle looking more like a dust mop than a squirrel. "I prefer biscuits to laundry," he declared. Tobias only chuckled, brushing flour from his vest as he accepted a biscuit. And though Clover's wash day hadn't gone quite as planned, she agreed it had been far more entertaining than expected. The days were growing longer, the chill of winter softening into the damp green promise of spring. Tobias sat at his workbench one quiet morning, polishing a set of brass hinges until they gleamed. Outside, the trees dripped with melted frost, and the brook behind his workshop sang louder than it had in months. A frantic knock came at the door. Tobias opened it to find Clover the dormouse, eyes wide, fur ruffled. "Oh, Tobias, you must come quickly. My lantern, it's gone straight into the brook." She was nearly in tears, wringing her paws. "I hung it out to dry after cleaning it, and the wind, oh, the dreadful wind, snatched it away." Tobias fetched his walking stick and followed Clover, ears twitching in sympathy. The brook sparkled, swollen from melted snow. Sure enough, there bobbed the little lantern, caught for a moment on a reed before spinning onward. "Oh no," Clover squeaked, running along the bank. "It'll be lost forever." Tobias steadied his spectacles and studied the current. "Not if we're clever." Just then, Grady bounded out from a nearby hazel thicket, a pawful of nuts bulging from his cheeks. "What's all this?" Clover waved desperately. "My lantern. Save it, Grady." Grady, eager for drama, dashed toward the water's edge. Too far, too fast. With a splash, he skidded into the mud, tail soaked. The lantern drifted farther away. Tobias sighed, though there was a smile tugging at his whiskers. He found a long branch and hooked it deftly into the brook, snagging the lantern's handle just as it spun past. With one smooth motion, he lifted it free. The lantern dripped water, but looked otherwise unharmed. Clover gasped with relief. "Oh, Tobias, you are a marvel." She clutched the lantern close, mud splattering her apron as she hugged it. Grady, still dripping, muttered, "I loosened it for you." Tobias merely chuckled. "Let's dry it properly this time." Indoors, back at the workshop, Tobias set the lantern on the stove, letting its glass dry in the warmth. Clover hovered anxiously, but soon it gleamed once more, polished and safe. She promised to keep it well away from the brook in future. As evening fell, the lantern was lit and hung at Tobias's door, casting a gentle glow on the damp moss outside. Grady sulked until Tobias handed him a biscuit, and Clover declared she would never forget the day her lantern took a swim. And Tobias, sipping tea with his friends by the fire, thought it was yet another proof that even ordinary days in Fernwood always carried small adventures. The morning after the lantern incident, the rain returned. It came in soft patters at first, then in steady sheets, filling the ditches and turning the paths into ribbons of mud. Tobias sat by his window, listening to the rhythm on the roof, when a knock sounded again. This time it was Hazel the hedgehog, bundled in a thick shawl and carrying a basket of boots. "They're hopeless," she sighed, setting them on the bench, all muddled together. "I lent them out over winter, and now I don't know which belongs to whom." Tobias peered at the heap. Large boots, small boots, sturdy boots, and one with a hole through the sole. He chuckled softly. "We shall have to sort them like a puzzle." Grady arrived, of course, sniffing curiously at the pile. "Finders keepers?" he asked, tugging at a small pair. Hazel slapped his paw away. The three of them spent the morning matching boots. Tobias measured each pair, squinting through his spectacles. Hazel tried them on herself, though her prickles made the smaller ones a tight squeeze. Grady stomped about dramatically in Bramwell the badger's enormous boots, leaving muddy prints across the floor. Clover soon wandered in, clutching her rescued lantern. "What's all this?" "Boots," Tobias said simply. Clover gasped. I thought I'd lost mine. She spotted a tiny pair, patched at the toe, and squeaked with joy. These are mine. By midday, they had matched most of the pairs. Bramwell's huge boots were delivered to his burrow. Mina's dainty slippers returned to her doorstep. And Hazel kept the sturdy hedgehog pair she'd secretly hoped to reclaim. Only one boot remained unmatched. A small left shoe with a peculiar buckle. They all stared at it. Whose is it? Clover wondered. Tobias turned it over thoughtfully. Perhaps a newcomer has wandered to Fernwood. The mystery left them curious, and Tobias set the little boot on his shelf as a reminder. Perhaps one day its owner would appear, tapping politely on the workshop door. Until then, Tobias enjoyed the calm that followed the muddle, sipping tea with his friends while the rain drummed softly above. A week later, when the skies had cleared and the brook ran gently again, Tobias decided to walk farther into the forest. The air was rich with damp earth and budding leaves. Birds trilled overhead, and violets dotted the mossy ground. Clover and Grady insisted on joining him. An adventure, Grady declared, stuffing nuts into his pockets. They hadn't gone far when Clover spotted something unusual, a hollow tree, leaning sideways across the path. Its bark was split, its trunk half empty, yet inside glowed the warm, golden flicker of something. Lantern light, Clover whispered. They approached cautiously. Tobias tapped the trunk with his stick. The hollow echoed softly. From within came the faint rustle of movement. "Hello," Tobias called gently. Out popped a small vole, blinking at them with wide eyes. "Oh, visitors," she squeaked. Her fur was dusty, her paws smudged with soil. "I only moved in last week. Forgive the mess." The vole introduced herself as Tilly, newly arrived in Fernwood. She had found the hollow tree abandoned and made it her home, but the roof leaked dreadfully, and she hadn't quite figured out how to hang her lantern properly. Clover gasped. The boot. At once Tobias knew. Back at the workshop, he fetched the little left shoe. Tilly's eyes lit up when she saw it. "My boot. I thought I'd lost it in the mud." She slipped it on happily, though it was a bit damp still. Tobias, ever practical, offered to mend her roof and fit her lantern with a proper bracket. Grady, meanwhile, busied himself dragging out twigs and clutter, though he managed to get stuck twice in the doorway. By evening, the hollow tree looked brighter and sturdier. Tilly invited them to share her simple supper of roots and berries. They sat together in the lantern's warm glow, the forest quiet around them. Tobias felt content. A new neighbor had joined their circle, and the mystery of the lone boot was solved. Clover sighed happily. Grady picked berry seeds from his whiskers, and Tilly beamed to find herself already surrounded by friends. The walk home beneath the stars was peaceful, Tobias's heart full. The workshop might have been his anchor, but it was the forest and its companions that made life truly rich. Tilly had only just begun to feel settled in her hollow tree when another difficulty arose. The little chimney she had built from stones and clay refused to draw properly. Whenever she lit a fire, smoke billowed down instead of up, filling the hollow until her eyes stung. She scurried to Tobias's workshop in a fit of coughing. "It's hopeless," she declared, waving her paws dramatically. "I tried fanning it. I tried poking it. I even climbed on the roof and shouted at it. But nothing works." Tobias stroked his whiskers and set down his teacup. "A chimney must be coaxed," he said in his patient way, "not bullied." Clover and Hazel soon joined them, eager for any excuse to help. The four of them tramped through the soft earth to Tilly's hollow tree. The air smelled faintly of smoke and damp moss. The chimney looked lopsided, its stones stacked bravely but unevenly. Tobias peered up inside, squinting through his spectacles. "Ah, murmureth. There's your culprit." A fat old rook had stuffed the top with twigs for a nest, as if the chimney were nothing more than a hollow branch. "Oh dear," Tilly cried. "I didn't see that." It took some balancing on Tobias's part, and Clover fretting beneath with her paws outstretched in case he toppled, to clear the blockage. Grady arrived halfway through, munching hazelnuts and offering absolutely no help except to remark, "That rook's got a sense of humor." Once the nest was cleared, Tobias reshaped the chimney mouth, adding a little cap of bark so rain wouldn't drip inside. They lit a cautious fire, and this time the smoke rose neatly upward, vanishing into the sky where it belonged. Tilly clapped her paws with delight. At last, now I can cook without choking. That evening, she served a pot of nettle broth to her helpers, the hollow tree filled with warmth instead of smoke. Tobias leaned back in his chair with quiet satisfaction, thinking how often small troubles, once solved together, became the sweetest of shared memories. One misty morning, Tobias awoke to find his spectacles missing. He searched the bedside table, the workshop bench, and even his teapot lid, but they were nowhere. "I can't mend a thing without them," he muttered, squinting hopelessly at a hinge he was polishing. Grady popped in just then, tossing a nut into the air. "Lost your peepers? Maybe you left them on the moon." Not helpful, Tobias sighed. Word spread quickly, as it often did in Fernwood. Soon Hazel arrived, suggesting they retrace his steps, and Clover carried a lantern though it was broad daylight. Even Tilly came, eager to contribute to this new adventure. They searched the path, the brook, the hollow tree, and even the roots of Bramwell's burrow. Bramwell, still half asleep, grumbled, "Try looking on your own nose," before rolling over again. At last, Clover noticed something glinting in the moss near a fallen log. "Here," she squeaked. Tobias hurried over, and sure enough, there lay his spectacles, a little bent but intact. "How on earth?" Tobias began. Then he remembered pausing there yesterday to tie his shoelace. He must have set them down and walked away without them. Grady puffed out his chest. "I loosened the moss so you could see them," he claimed. Back at the workshop, Tobias carefully straightened the frames. "I don't know what I'd do without friends to search where I cannot see," he admitted warmly. The others beamed, and Tilly declared she would sew him a proper case so they'd never slip away again. Tobias chuckled, knowing full well spectacles had a mind of their own, but he accepted gratefully. That night, as the mist curled through the trees, Tobias cleaned his lenses and set them neatly by his bed, promising himself he'd keep better watch over them. Though deep down, he rather enjoyed the commotion such small misadventures stirred among his friends. Spring deepened, and with it came long spells of rain. One gray morning, Clover tapped at Tobias's window. Would you come with me to Hazel's?" I promised her a jar of honey, but the brook is so swollen I daren't go alone. Tobias pulled on his sturdy boots and fetched an umbrella fashioned from broad chestnut leaves. Grady, overhearing, insisted on tagging along, grumbling that he might drown of boredom otherwise. The path was slick with mud, and the brook indeed ran high, frothing over its banks. Clover clutched the jar of honey as if it were treasure. "If I slip, it'll smash for certain," she fretted. "Then don't slip," Grady said unhelpfully, teetering on a rock to show off. They reached the narrow log bridge and found it slick with rain. Tobias tested it with his stick, then led the way slowly, umbrella bobbing above his head. Clover followed, paws trembling, but with Tobias steadying her, she made it safely across. Grady, naturally, bounded after them in one leap and landed splat in the mud. By the time they reached Hazel's burrow, Clover's whiskers were drooping, Tobias's cloak dripped steadily, and Grady looked like a walking puddle. But Hazel welcomed them with warm towels and a kettle of mint tea. The jar of honey was delivered safe and sound, and Clover's relief was so great she nearly wept. Tobias, sipping his tea, reflected that even the smallest errands could feel like heroic journeys when the weather and nerves conspired together. On the way home, the rain thinned, and a rainbow arched faintly above the trees. Clover brightened at once. Perhaps the brook isn't so dreadful after all, she admitted. Grady, still muddy, muttered, "Next time I'm carrying the honey." And Tobias, smiling behind his spectacles, knew that in Fernwood, rain or shine, the simplest of tasks always grew into tales worth retelling by the fire. It was a morning soaked with drizzle, the sort that blurred the world into soft shades of green and gray. Tobias sat at his workbench, polishing a set of drawer handles, when his paw slipped and the drawer slid farther than it usually did. Something thin and folded was wedged at the back, dusty from neglect. He drew it out and unfolded it carefully. It was a map, hand-sketched, faintly smudged, with crooked lines and notations in an unfamiliar paw. The forest was marked with winding paths, the brook drawn like a silver thread, and there, near the hollow tree, was a tiny X. Tobias adjusted his spectacles. "Curious," he murmured. Clover appeared at the door just then, carrying a basket of dandelion greens. "What's curious?" she asked, setting them down with her usual bustling energy. "A map," Tobias replied, holding it out. Grady, who had been hanging upside down from the eaves for no reason at all, dropped down with a thump. "A treasure map," he declared, whiskers twitching. "Where there's an X, there's bound to be treasure." Clover frowned at the smudges. Or perhaps someone simply dropped their ink pot. Tilly soon arrived, eager for company, and Hazel followed with her shawl drawn tight against the damp. Before Tobias knew it, the workshop was abuzz with speculation. "Well," Tobias said at last, "whether it's treasure or nothing at all, we may as well have a look. It would be a shame for curiosity to go unanswered." The rain had eased to a mist by the time they set out, Tobias leading with the map clutched carefully. The forest shimmered with droplets, every leaf and blade of grass bejeweled with water. Birds flitted low, their wings scattering showers from the branches. They followed the sketched paths, comparing each bend of the brook, each twist of root and stone. At last, near the hollow tree, Tobias stopped. "Here," he said, "this is where the X lies." They all looked around. Nothing unusual presented itself. Only moss, ferns, and the damp hollow at Tilly's doorstep. Grady immediately began digging. "Stand back," he cried. "If it's buried treasure, I'll have it uncovered in no time." Mud flew in every direction. "Mind my doorway," Tilly scolded, brushing dirt from her apron. Clover spotted something gleaming in the roots. "Look there!" She tugged gently and unearthed. Not gold, not jewels, but a small tin box. Its lid was rusty, but Tobias pried it open with his paw. Inside lay a collection of trinkets. A button carved of bone, a length of ribbon, a smooth pebble shaped like a heart. A child's collection, perhaps, or keepsakes left by some long-ago forest dweller. Clover held the ribbon up to the light. "Oh, it's beautiful." Tilly smiled softly. "Not treasure, perhaps, but treasures all the same." Grady scowled. "I was hoping for at least a crown." Tobias closed the tin carefully. Sometimes the worth of a thing is not in gold or silver, but in the memories it carries. They decided the trinkets should be kept safe in the workshop, where all could admire them. That evening, as the rain tapped gently once more at the windows, Tobias placed the tin on the mantel. It gleamed faintly in the lamplight, a reminder that Fernwood itself was the real treasure. Its mossy hollows, its gentle friends, and its endless little mysteries. The following week brought sudden sunshine, as if the forest had grown weary of gray. Every twig and leaf seemed to sparkle, and the air rang with birdsong. Tobias, glad for the change, decided to walk with Clover and Tilly to gather herbs along the hedgerow that bordered the meadow. The hedge was thick with brambles and sweet-smelling blossoms, bees busy among them. Clover carried a basket for thyme and chamomile, while Tilly tottered along with scissors nearly too big for her paws. Grady, of course, tagged behind, claiming he was there to protect them from bandits. All went smoothly until Tilly leaned too far into the hedge in pursuit of a particularly plump sprig of thyme. Her apron snagged on a thorn, and in her efforts to free herself, she became hopelessly tangled. "Oh dear!" she squeaked, wriggling furiously. Clover tried to help, but her sleeves caught as well, and soon she was stuck beside Tilly, both of them waving paws like flags. Tobias sighed, setting down his basket. "Hold still, both of you." He gently eased the fabric free, careful not to tear it. Grady, meanwhile, snickered until he leaned too close and got his tail caught. "Not funny now, is it?" Clover huffed. It took the better part of half an hour to free everyone, by which time their baskets lay forgotten and bees buzzed indignantly at the disturbance. Tobias finally stepped back, spectacles askew, and declared, "There, perhaps we should gather herbs from the meadowside instead." They laughed about it later, once the scratches were soothed with salve and tea. Even Grady admitted that hedges were fiercer than bandits. Tilly, though embarrassed, confessed she had enjoyed the adventure, for it had ended with everyone crowded in Tobias's kitchen, sipping tea and recounting the ordeal with more humor than distress. And Tobias thought, as he tidied away the salve, that the forest had a way of snaring not just aprons and tails, but hearts as well, binding friends closer with each silly mishap. As summer edged closer, Tobias found his workshop busier than ever. Neighbors came with broken latches, leaky kettles, and toys worn from winter play. Tobias was glad of the company, but he often found himself startled by sudden knocks that sent him spilling his tea. One morning, after such a start, Clover said gently, "Why don't you put a bell on the door, Tobias? That way you'll hear it ring instead of jump at the knock." It was a fine idea. Tobias rummaged through his drawers until he found a small brass bell, though its clapper was missing. He set to work fashioning a new one from a scrap of tin, polishing it until it gleamed. When at last it was fixed above the door, he called his friends to test it. Clover pushed the door open carefully. Ting! Went the bell, bright and cheerful. Tilly clapped her paws in delight. Hazel, arriving with a bundle of mending, declared it the most welcoming sound in Fernwood. Of course, Grady had to push the door back and forth rapidly until Tobias threatened to confiscate his nuts. The bell soon became a beloved feature. Neighbors said it sounded like a note of kindness, as if Tobias's workshop itself were greeting them. Even on rainy days, when mud clung to their boots and cloaks dripped steadily, the cheerful ting seemed to lift spirits. Late one evening, when the forest lay hushed and the fire burned low, Tobias sat listening to the faint bell as Clover left after tea. It tinkled softly, a farewell as much as a greeting. Tobias smiled, thinking how the smallest of sounds could make a place feel alive. And so the bell by the door joined the lantern, the trinket box, and all the other small pieces of their woodland life. Ordinary things made extraordinary by the warmth they carried. Summer arrived not with fanfare, but with a long sigh. The drizzle of spring faded into soft mornings filled with birdsong, and the evenings stretched themselves lazily, painting the forest in gold. Tobias had begun setting his door open in the afternoons, letting the smell of honeysuckle drift into the workshop. One such afternoon, as he adjusted the latch on Hazel's sewing box, Grady burst in with his usual lack of ceremony. "Come quick. You'll never believe what's plopped itself in the middle of the meadow." Tobias raised an eyebrow, adjusting his spectacles. "Plopped? Yes, plopped. A chair, just sitting there like it grew from the grass." Clover, who had been folding fabric in the corner, gasped. "A chair? In the meadow? That's most unusual." And so it was decided they would investigate. The little party, Tobias, Clover, Tilly, and of course Grady, set off down the path, past the brook glittering in sunlight, past the hawthorn hedge that buzzed with bees, until at last the meadow opened before them, rolling in green. And there it stood indeed, a chair, upright, as though waiting for its owner to return. It was wooden, rather plain, with one leg sunk slightly in the soil. Clover approached reverently. Whose could it be? Tilly tilted her head. Do chairs walk away on their own? Grady snorted. Maybe it's treasure, only disguised as a chair. He clambered onto it, wiggling until it creaked alarmingly. Careful, Tobias warned, tapping the leg with his stick. It's weathered but still serviceable. He squatted beside it, running his paw along the grain. Someone carried this here, though I can't imagine why. Hazel arrived just then, apron flapping as she hurried. Oh, there it is. I'd wondered where my chair had gone. I set it out to air on the path, and it must have been dragged here by the badger cubs for play. Everyone laughed with relief. The mystery was solved, and together they carried the chair back to Hazel's burrow. Along the way, Clover declared it was the most peculiar errand she had ever walked, and Tilly admitted she'd half expected the chair to start walking on its own. When it was safely returned, Hazel invited them in for berry cordial. They sipped it in the cool shade, the chair sitting proudly in its rightful place. Tobias mused aloud. Funny, isn't it, how the smallest things, like a chair in the wrong place, can turn into adventures worth remembering. The others agreed, and Grady suggested they keep an eye out in case a table decided to sprout in the field next. The next week dawned bright and windy, the sort of day when the clouds scud quickly across the sky and the scent of wild mint carried through the fields. Grady, restless as ever, had fashioned a kite from scraps of cloth and string, which he proudly declared would soar higher than the crows. Clover shook her head doubtfully, but when Tobias was persuaded to come and watch, she tagged along too, and Tilly joined with her ever-ready curiosity. They reached the clearing by the brook, where the wind tugged at grass and rattled the reeds. Grady held his kite aloft, tail twitching with excitement. Stand back, everyone. You're about to see greatness. With a running start, he launched it into the air. To everyone's surprise, the kite caught at once, snapping upward on the breeze. Its cloth panels shimmered as it climbed higher and higher. Oh, Clover gasped. It's beautiful. Tilly clapped her paws. It's like a bird. Tobias nodded approvingly. Remarkably steady. But just as Grady was puffing with pride, the wind shifted sharply. The kite veered and dove, string tangling around a high oak branch. There it stuck fast, fluttering like a trapped butterfly. Grady groaned. No, my masterpiece. Tobias studied the branch. It's too high for climbing. We'll need a longer solution. Clover suggested shaking the tree, but it was far too large. Tilly proposed poking it free with a stick, but even Tobias's walking stick fell short. They stood puzzling until Hazel arrived, drawn by the commotion. Why not use the brook, she said calmly. The wind blows toward it. If we wait, the breeze may tug the kite free on its own. And so they did. They sat by the bank, talking and laughing, nibbling Clover's oat biscuits while the kite flapped stubbornly overhead. Time passed, shadows shifted, and just as Tobias was beginning to think Hazel wrong, a strong gust swept through. With a triumphant snap, the string loosened and the kite sailed free, tumbling down to the brook's edge. Grady dashed to retrieve it, cheering. See? I told you it was the best kite in Fernwood. The others laughed, wetting their paws in the brook to help smooth the kite's cloth. It was patched and frayed, but still intact. As the sun lowered and the sky glowed peach, they walked home together, the kite folded carefully in Grady's arms. Tobias felt the warmth of the day linger in his heart, not in the flight of the kite itself, but in the waiting together, the laughter, and the simple delight when at last it came free. One warm afternoon, Tilly came scurrying to the workshop in a flurry. Oh, Tobias, it's dreadful. I've lost a button from my best apron, and it's rolled off somewhere. Tobias, used to more serious crises being delivered with the same tone, merely smiled. Well then, let's find it. They set out along the path where Tilly had last been, Clover joining with her lantern, though it was broad daylight. Grady tagged behind, licking honey from his paws. The path was soft with clover and dandelion fluff. They searched beneath leaves, in the moss under stones. Clover thought she glimpsed a glimmer near the brook, but it was only a beetle polishing its wings. Tilly fretted, wringing her paws. It was my mother's apron. If the button's lost, I'll never forgive myself. At last, Tobias spotted something round caught in a spider's web between two reeds. Carefully, he plucked it free. Here we are. Tilly gasped in relief. Oh, thank you, Tobias. She held the button close, eyes shining. Grady shrugged. Not treasure, but close enough. Back at the workshop, Tobias stitched it firmly in place, Clover holding the thread and Tilly watching with admiration. You're more than a carpenter, she said softly. You mend more than wood. You mend our little lives. Tobias chuckled, but the words stayed with him long after the friends had gone. He sat by the door as the evening breeze rustled the leaves, the new bell tinkling gently overhead. A lost button, a stuck kite, a chair in a meadow. None were grand adventures, yet each had filled the days with laughter and companionship. Tobias leaned back in his chair, deeply content. Fernwood had a way of proving that even the smallest things, when shared, became stories worth treasuring. The brook was never still, even in the hottest weeks of summer, when the sun baked the clearing and the earth grew cracked near the meadow. The brook ran on, cool, stubborn, silver in its persistence. Tobias often said that if you listened closely at night, the brook told secrets only the water knew, of roots it curled around, of stones it polished, of minnows darting under its ripples. One evening, after a sweltering day when even Grady had gone quiet from the heat, Clover suggested a twilight walk. The brook will be cooler than sitting inside. And besides, fireflies are out this week. I saw 3 by Hazel's hedge just last night. So they set off, Clover, Tobias, Tilly, and a reluctantly sticky Grady, who insisted on carrying a jar of blackcurrant jelly for emergencies. The path was dusky, soft with moths flitting and the scent of honeysuckle drifting heavy in the air. When they reached the brook, they gasped at the sight. Dozens of fireflies blinking in and out like little green stars, floating low over the reeds. The brook glimmered faintly, catching the last of the light, and the fireflies seemed to be dancing right above it, as though guiding the water along its way. Oh, it's magical, Tilly whispered, paws clasped. Clover nodded. Like lanterns, lanterns without flame. Grady rolled his eyes but sat down anyway, his whiskers twitching with reluctant awe. Pretty, I'll admit. Almost worth the walk. The friends sat in silence for a long while, listening to the brook and the gentle chorus of crickets. Tobias closed his eyes, the cool breeze rustling his fur, and for once even his thoughts were still. It was Tilly who broke the silence with a small cry. Look, something's caught in the water. They scrambled up, peering into the shallows. There, bobbing against a reed, was an old lantern, rusted, but with a faint shimmer of glass still intact. How curious, Tobias murmured, wading a paw in to pull it free. It was heavy, moss clinging to the handle. Maybe it floated down from the village, Clover guessed. Or maybe her eyes glinted mischievously. Maybe the brook wanted to give us a lantern of our own. Grady snorted. Water doesn't give presents. It probably just got lost. Still, Tobias carried it carefully home. By the next day, after a good scrubbing and a bit of polishing, the lantern gleamed softly in his workshop, hanging by the door where the new bell chimed. When night fell, they lit it, and the warm glow spilled across the path. Tilly sighed contentedly. Now the brook's lantern lights our way, even when the fireflies are asleep. And though Tobias didn't say so aloud, he rather liked thinking that perhaps the brook had indeed chosen them for its little gift. The mornings grew heavy with the drone of bees and the rustle of leaves. Clover, always one to keep her paws busy, had begun a new project. She brought it to the workshop one afternoon in a basket. Scraps of fabric, squares of old curtains, bits of worn aprons, even a piece of Tobias's own mended shirt sleeve. "I'm going to make a quilt," she announced proudly, setting the basket down with a thump. "A summer quilt, light but strong. Every square will have a memory." Tilly's eyes shone. "Oh, may I help?" Grady wrinkled his nose. "Sewing? Sounds dreadfully slow." But Clover was determined. She spread the scraps out across Tobias's workbench, arranging and rearranging until patterns emerged. A square of blue beside a patch of faded red, a stripe against a floral print. Tobias, amused, moved his tools aside and let her take the whole bench. Soon Tilly was threading needles, Clover was stitching, and even Tobias found himself hemming a corner when Clover insisted his steady paws were wasted on wood alone. Day after day, they worked at it. The quilt grew slowly, each piece joined with careful stitches. Clover told stories with each patch. This square came from Hazel's old apron, the one she wore when she baked honey cakes the day the storm came. And that's from the curtain Tobias saved when the wind tore it down. Remember how we laughed as he chased it across the meadow? Even Grady, though he pretended boredom, contributed in the end. He snuck in a square cut from the lining of his vest, grumbling that if you're all making this thing, I may as well leave my mark. At last, on a golden afternoon, the quilt was finished. They carried it outside to the meadow, spreading it out beneath the oak. It rippled like a patchwork rainbow in the sunlight, every piece holding a memory stitched into place. Clover smoothed it proudly. "It's not just a quilt, it's our summer sewn together." They laid down upon it, gazing up at the drifting clouds, telling stories until the sky turned rose-colored. Tobias thought, as the others laughed beside him, that the quilt was more than fabric. It was a reminder that even scraps and remnants, when joined with care, could become something whole, warm, and lasting. The brook was low now. Its stones revealed where once the water had rushed. One morning, Tilly arrived breathless at Tobias's door. "The brook is sparkling," she cried. "There are pebbles like jewels all along the shore." Curious, the friends followed her. Sure enough, the receding water had uncovered dozens of smooth stones. White, gray, amber, some even tinged faintly pink or green. Sunlight made them glimmer like treasure scattered carelessly by giants. "Marvelous," Clover whispered, crouching to pick up a round one. "They're so smooth, like they've been polished for us." Grady immediately stuffed half a dozen into his pockets. "Treasure at last. Don't tell me these aren't valuable." Tobias smiled, running a paw over a flat, oval pebble. "They're valuable in their way. Each one's been shaped by years of water and time." The day turned into a pebble hunt. They searched up and down the brook, laughing as they filled baskets. Tilly squealed every time she found one shaped like a heart or an egg. Clover lined hers carefully by color, arranging them in patterns. Grady boasted he'd found the shiniest of all, and held it aloft until he slipped and tumbled into the shallows, soaking his fur. By the time the sun was dipping, they had gathered more pebbles than they could carry. Back at the workshop, Tobias laid them out in rows along the shelves. "We'll keep them here," he said. "A collection of the Brooks gifts." Clover suggested using some as paperweights. Tilly wanted to paint little faces on them. Grady grumbled, but kept polishing his shiniest pebble long into the evening. Later, as fireflies returned to the reeds, Tobias sat alone with the pebbles, the lantern glowing by the door. He ran a paw over their cool, smooth surfaces, feeling the stories held in their silence. Stones, buttons, scraps, chairs. Everything ordinary became extraordinary when shared with friends. The brook outside whispered its secrets again, and Tobias thought he almost understood. The end. Thank you for wandering through the woodland with us today. If you enjoyed your visit to Old Fernwood, don't forget to leave a like, share this tale with a friend, and subscribe for more cozy stories. Until next time, may your days be calm, your hearth warm, and your heart light.